Great. It's a pleasure for me, the colleagues, to welcome you for the second lecture in this December series on Syriac magical texts. I am pleased to welcome Erika Hunter today, a speaker for whom there's no necessity to be introduced because we all know her very well. She has been working as a chair of the Center for Eastern and Orthodox Christianity at SOAS in London, and is the principal investigator at the Christian Library from Turfan. And today, Erika will be sharing with us an interesting lecture about Syriac prayer amulets from the Turfan Library collection. Her presentation, entitled Traversing Time and Territory, Dynamics of Syriac Prayer Amulets from Turfan, is the second lecture we have this December. And I'm very pleased to have you all here. And thank you, dear Erika, for your acceptance of our invitation.
Well, thank you very much, Alexei and Taya, for inviting me. It is a great pleasure. You've given the title. Actually, I thought a better title would be Discovering Paradise at Turfan. However, that was an advertised title, but the alternative title could be Discovering Paradise. Now, I should share my screen, should I not? Alexei, is it a 50-minute or an hour lecture?
It's up to you. I think you can talk.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So,
yeah.
Yes.
Right. So, do I just press share screen?
Yes, try. You have the right to do it.
Yes.
Right.
You may need to press it twice.
I've got share, but I don't know which one it is. Open Zoom. Do you think Google Chrome? No, Zoom. Lord, see, unfortunately, this is not my computer, so I'm not that familiar with it. It's on my desktop.
I may try to do it from my computer.
Why don't you do it, and I'll tell you when to,
okay,
because
okay.
I have it on my desktop, but
okay. One moment. One moment. Okay. I have to make it.
I mean, I did run through it just before, so it is working, but I know this sounds a very poor excuse, but I really can't navigate as like on my own computer.
No problem at all. If you want, you can send it to Alexei or me.
Yes, I already have it. I already have it.
Ah, excellent.
Yes. A moment. Yes.
Ah, good. Right. Now, can I click through, or will you have to do that?
I will have to do it, of course.
Right. All right. Well, now you'll see it's University of Cambridge because I've recently become affiliated researcher. Let's start off. Let's move on. We all know the title and we know the series. Right. Okay. Now, the Turfan, in 1904, the second German Turfan Expedition found the monastery site of Bulayik in Turfan, and where you see the arrow pointing to the north, that is where Turfan is. It is in now the Xinjiang Uighur Autonomous Province of Western China, which is often in the news. That is the monastery site down in the bottom right, and that is Albert von Leclerc looking very Prussian in his military outfit in the middle of the picture. Well, amongst the finds were an important, if not a huge number of manuscripts of prayer amulets from Turfan. Count Otani, between September 1902 and February 1904, also had expeditions in Turfan, and he found another prayer amulet, but we don't know the exact location within Turfan, whereas we know that von Leclerc's manuscripts came from that site that you see. The prayer amulets focused on martyrdom or crowning of a named saint, and are usually identified by the term harma. Many of you will know that term, anathema, in their titles. And they're a very specific category. I wrote as long ago as 1987 on this, where the saint at the point of martyrdom offers a prayer to God. Next slide, please, Alexei. And he asks, the next slide, please.
1 moment.
He asks for his prayer to be answered, and it's always at the point of martyrdom. I've written extensively on Mar Tamsis. I wrote a very long article, and this is one of actually it was the very first prayer amulet that we discovered at Turfan. And next slide, please, Alexei. And here we have a dislocated join with Syriac HT 99, which was clearly cut down to produce an amulet. The next slide. It's quite unusual because you'll see on side B the cross folded, the cross in the center, roughly drawn, typically Church of the East. You have the Xi'an full stele. And next slide, please. Mar Tamsis is an obscure figure, still commemorated in the Church of the East. No one seems to know who he was, but he's not a figment of imagination. And that's the sort of illustration you have in 19th century manuscripts. And his prayer amulet beseeching, Lord God Almighty, grant me the request, signals the beginning of the actual anathema. And that's very, very typical of the anathema genre. The next slide. We have 2 more amulets, prayer amulets from Turfan, both dedicated to Mar Cyprian, the only saint where we find 2 examples at Turfan. And here is one example, Syriac HT 102, and that is to Mar Cyprian or Cyprian. And again, you see line 3, when he was celebrated in this world, he besought from God and he granted him his request. That is the formula that opens the prayer amulet. You will see parallels in M316, that is Mingana 316, now in Selly Oak, Birmingham, in yellow, showing a similar sort of terminology that has transmitted down the centuries. And the next slide. And Syriac N stands for Nicholas Sims Williams, who has done so much work in Sogdian, and these N manuscripts, and you can see that the plate, the glass plate, was labelled. The person didn't read Syriac, and they've been labelled upside down. But of course, I've turned the plate so you can read the Syriac. And these N manuscripts are housed in the library of the Turfan Forschung in Berlin. The other manuscripts are largely housed in the Staatsbibliothek. And N364 and 365, they are again dislocated fragments. Unfortunately, we don't find the intermediate parts. Again says, by the prayer of Mar Cyprian, and the saint, you can see very faintly the rubric heading, who, as he was celebrated in this world, requested from our Lord Jesus Christ, and he gave him his request. These two separate prayer amulets that are addressed to Mar Cyprian. And if we go back one slide, can we go back? And you can see he asks on the holy day of Sunday, all those evil, vile, and odious ones will be destroyed, overcome, and voided. For those of you who have very sharp eyes, there is a word which I've puzzled a lot for a long time, mabreen, something depart and come to naught. But anyway, the point being that it's got the typical formula of the amulet, of the anathema, that the saint utters this prayer at the point of martyrdom. Now, the dating of the anathemas of Mar Tamsis and Mar Cyprian from Turfan is uncertain. We just don't know. They're written probably between the 9th and the 13th centuries, when we think most Turfan manuscripts were written. But, of course, as I have alluded to, this is a very long tradition, and we have handbooks of prayer amulets from the late 18th, early 19th, 20th centuries used by the Christian communities who formerly lived in northern Mesopotamia, and we have exemplars in them. Mingana manuscript 316 has a long anathema to Mar Cyprian, which I published, and the anathema to Mar Tamsis occurs in a number of handbooks now in various public repositories. And I believe, and I know Gabby is here and done work on these manuscripts, that the earliest handbook where Mar Tamsis occurs is dated to 1755 and is the Erevan Maten Adaran manuscript, Syriac 72. Some exemplars have been published. Most of you will be familiar with these. Harvard manuscript Syriac 159 by Hazard, already in 1895, and in the Houghton Library, the British Library, Oriental 6673 by Golantz, in his famous book of Protection. So we have various published manuscripts. So they continued, and they were well known right into the end of the 19th, 20th centuries. Now, if we hold it there, the discovery of Mar Tamsis and Mar Cyprian at Turfan creates a tangible link from northern Mesopotamia. And they came from the west to Turfan. They obviously must have been part of the outreach literature that the monks of the Church of the East took with them on their outreach. And the tradition continued in the Mesopotamian homeland long after the communities at Turfan died out, probably in the 14th century. That's what we think. But we have now had further evidence of the usage of prayer amulets in 3 separate folios, which can be joined together, or 3 separate fragments, I should say, that can be joined together to form a single folio, Syriac HT 206, Syriac HT 235, and Syriac HT 316. And these these joined together. Unfortunately, my technical skills are limited, and some people can do wonderful joins, but I can't. But I've put the three there, and they do actually join up. So the Syriac HT206 is the largest fragment. You can see it on the left-hand side. And Syriac 235 is, of course, only 3 fragments, and it forms an intermediate fragment with 316 on its right-hand side, so the 3 pieced together. All 3 on codicological grounds do come from the same manuscript, and they're all written in the East Syriac or medial estrangular hand. And if you just have a look, you can see that the dalet and the resh are comma-shaped, the hey and the wow are closed, aleph has several forms, a medial estrangular form, and a derivative where the body has become compressed with the upper oblique moved to a vertical position and ending in a nodule pointing to the left. I'm just trying to think. That's the medial estrangular on line 3 and line 4 of 206. And we have then the second last line, we have the derivative, and then you have the vertical stroke, which is at the bottom 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of 206. So we have 3 different alephs. Kit Coakley and I, in our book on MIK 345, wrote about the paleography, and the paleography of these prayer amulets fits comfortably within that repertoire. The head of the sheen is concave, as you would expect. You can see it here, and the meme is closed, and etc. Now, I want to, if we could have the next slide.
I'm sorry, we have some noise from someone, but everyone is mute. I don't understand.
Never mind, we'll keep going.
Okay.
And as you can see, the translation of 216, the 3 fragments put together, 206, 235, and 316, may you remove from him all illnesses and diseases and fevers and seizures and melancholy and the evil eye and all those sufferings and pains, and they're called hashe, and there would be pains here, and then that's an amen, which is in rubrics, you can't see it evenly, and then it starts with the quotation from Genesis 2:8, and as the Lord God planted, as the Lord God who planted paradise, and there you see paradise just at the end of 235, linking up with 206. That's one of the reasons how we got it. At the Nazav, there is the Nun, there's the Zadeh, and there is the Beit. So 235 and 236, the penultimate line, link up. So as the Lord God who planted paradise. So that is one side, and then if we turn over to the next slide.
One moment.
Right, and there you see the 2 fragments together of 206, and that is the small fragment of 235 on the other side. So, and here you see Allah Paradisa, it would be here, Dinasav, Mari Allah Paradisa, and Ba'eden, in Eden, and as he planted paradise in Eden, and he placed, I think, of course, with the meme is missing, and he placed in it a great source. And here you have Mawua Raba. The resh is quite removed, quite a gap between the resh and the beit on the second line, but it's Raba. Were Parish, and there's a nice sheen at the end with the double points underneath. Parish Minhe Arbaya Naharutha, and 4 rivers were divided from it, and there we have the names of the rivers. Pishon, the upper part of the sheen has been slightly damaged, and we have Pishon, we have Gihon. Now, interestingly, in the Peshitta, it would be Gimel, Wow, Het, Gimel, Yod, Het, Wow, Nun, but here the scribe has spelt it with the second Yod. And then, of course, the fourth river, the third river, Eklat, the Tigris, and then the fourth river, which it can be reconstructed, Perath, the Euphrates. Then the verb Nahin is, there are orthographic differences with the Peshitta, because the Peshitta would have a Gimel, Gihin, whereas the 206 has Nihin. I attribute that possibly to a scribal error down the centuries. Could I have the next slide, please? So we look at it. And may you remove from him all illnesses and diseases and fevers and seizures and melancholy and the evil eye and all those sufferings and pains. Amen. I would have liked to have rubricated the Amen, but I couldn't work out this new PowerPoint program. And as the Lord God planted paradise in Eden, and he placed in it a great source and divided from it were 4 rivers, etc. And they were tranquil and quiet and entering. Now it matches the opening of Goland's Codex B. Hang on. It matches the Codex of Codex B, Goland's Codex B, but the placing of the sequence of ills, the ailments, differs, because in Codex B, and I was very delighted, Alexei, that you mentioned Codex B, the Anathema of Paradise, at the very end of your lecture last week. Well, this is the very same anathema that we're looking at. The sequence of ills in Codex B follows this quotation from Genesis 2:8, whereas in Syriac HT, the sequence of ills proceeds. But of course, we have no heading. We only have the Amen, which would indicate the end of a sequence, and we're uncertain whether the sequence preceding does belong to the Paradise episode, i.e. the relationship isn't exactly established. However, both Codex B and Syriac HT 206 do have this emphasis on a sequence of ailments, etc. And I think it's a question of the movement, the flexibility, the fluidity of text that isn't fixed. Texts are quite flexible. Certainly you see this in incantation bowls. They can move around quite significantly. So both Syriac HT 206 and Codex B have no hallmarks of an anathema. They have no prayer request of the saint at martyrdom, which, as I have mentioned, I have considered to be the form critical sort of hallmark of anathema. It's missing. They're both missing in the in both codexes. Could I have the next slide, please? But Codex B, so that's all we have in that one that one folio, Syriac HT 206. It's frustratingly small, but that's what we do have. Codex B in Golance is, of course, much longer, with a Paradigmgebet, and its aim is to bind, anathematize, expel, prevent, and distance many different types of demons, many demons. And then it is quite unusual because it's followed by registers of names, long registers of names, and each are introduced by the phrase, by the prayers. There are 4 registers: doctors of the church, including, of course, which of course designates Mar Theodosius, Mar Theodorus, I'm sorry, and Mar Diodorus, so Theodore of Mopsuestia and Diodor of Tarsus, and Nestorius. And of course, Nestorius is always in 3rd position because the other 2 were the major theologians. So, of course, the main doctors of the Church of the East, but also the great figures of Syriac Christianity: Ephraim, Nasai, and Abraham of Kashgar, who was so instrumental in the monastic reform in the mid-6th century. So we have this category by the prayers, and it lists these prayers. And then we have category 2, spiritual fathers, each preceded by the epithet Abba, father, and these are major figures of monasticism without the Church of the East repertoire. So Antony, Macarius, all these greats from the Egyptian monasticism. And the 3rd category are the Eastern and Western fathers. That's the title. And of course, we are talking about East Syriac and West Syriac, each designated by the term Mar, and ranging from megamartyrs to localized saints. And then we have the 4th category is Mar John, names, a very long list of names, all Mar John, ranging from Mar John the Baptist to localized figures. May I have the next slide? Sorry, if you go back again. So if you could go. So John the Baptist to localized figures. And some of these figures are really curious and interesting, and I'd love to know more about them. Mar John of Gilu. Well, Gilu, of course, up in the KRG region. Mar John of Hatra, very famous site in northern Iraq. Mar John of Hira. And it's interesting because in the Zianful Stele, and this is somewhat removed from the topic of this paper, but in the Zianful Stele, we have a very high preponderance of names of Mar John, and then at the epigraphic inscriptions from Urgut, which Mark Dickens published, a very high proportion of names of Mar John. And which leads me to wonder whether Mar John is a sort of a particular category within monasticism. Now, I don't know, and I am just raising that possibility, but they have very, very long lists of Mar John. So we have these. So that's in Codex B. Unfortunately, Syriac HT 206 is simply one folio, and we don't have these listings. But could we turn to the next slide? We do have in Sogdian a prayer amulet, N396, so it's in the Turfan Forschung in Berlin. It's 10 by 7 centimeters, 10 lines. It's a full folio. And Nicholas Sims Williams has published it, and he has convincingly demonstrated that it is the Anathema of Paradise. And we will have a look at the contents in the next slide, but it does name a whole sequence of major figures. Bacchus, George, Nicholas has of course transcribed the names from Sogdian, which is written in a modified Syriac script, as you will see. Syriacus, Pethian, Nasai, Ephraim, and I have spelled Ephraim's name incorrectly, of course, as you will see, and Cyprian. Great mega figures of the ascetic and monastic oikoumene, far beyond the remit of the Church of the East, and then it concludes, may this anathema book and writing be sealed. So it clearly names it as an anathema, and Nicholas Sims Williams demonstrated convincingly that it was from the Anathema of Paradise. So if we could have the next slide, please. And this is the folio from the Turfan Forschung, and here you can see, if you look at the very top right hand corner, you can see Bacchus, and then Mar Georgis, and then Mar Kyriacus, and then Mar Pethion, and then it sort of goes into Sogdian, and I'm afraid my Sogdian language skills are rather limited, but you can clearly see the Syriac names transcribed into this Sogdian fragment folio. Very precious, one single folio. And could we have the next slide, please? And the Sogdian materials derive from Syriac exemplars. You can tell that I did some Sogdian, but my reading skills are not so good, but you can tell by the syntax that they're derivative of Syriac, but we don't have, and we have combed through all the extant Turfan fragments, maybe more will be found, but we have to date no match for Sogdian materials from Syriac exemplars. So that's a big question that I can't answer here. Where were the exemplars from which the Sogdian materials derived? Were they at Turfan or were they elsewhere? However, that led me onto a trail to look again at the Turfan fragments, and presumably the Sogdian folio was part of a much longer exemplar of the Paradise episode. Looking through the Turfan Forschung, the Turfan fragments, and these Syriac HT fragments are held in the Staatsbibliothek in Potsdamer Platz in Berlin. We have Syriac HT 354, and on the right hand side is the verso, the left hand side is the recto, and it's 5 lines only. But what you can clearly see if you look at the first line of the verso, i.e. on the right hand side, line 1, Antony, and then following, and then there's a point, well, Abba, and then and father, etc. We don't know who that actually is. And then on line 2, Wakulhun Abhathe, all the fathers, and probably Kadishe, because the Kof and the Dalet and the Yod of line 2, of course, is fractured with the break in the manuscript. So we have these fragments, 2 fragments, and if we have, if we go to, yes, we have verso Antony and Abba and all those holy fathers, planter, Natsuva, I think it is, and I think it's the head. I'm not sure. Any suggestions would be gratefully received, and I can't read the last word, but maybe someone can. And by the prayer, and something we think of the Malfana, Lamed, Pei, Nun, Aleph, and then recto, all those teachers, and then we have the typical formula that you find in, or one finds in the 19th century prayer-amulets, the prayers, the requests, the supplication, and Safuse. I'm not sure what that reading is, but I would appreciate suggestions, and prostrations. So we have here, a fragment that has the listing of commencing with Abba, that corresponds, of course, to codex B, where you have listings commencing with Abba. The next slide, please. Then we have another very small fragment that you can see, and don't be, they're so small, you have about 10 glass together in the one plate, so the small fragment that is here is actually not associated with this larger fragment, which is again 5 lines. And this is the verso on the right hand side, and the recto is on the right hand side, and the verso is on the left hand side. And again, the verso on the left hand side, you can see again names preceded by Abba. Well, Abba here, unfortunately, it's just, we don't have any more who it is. Well, Abba Yunan, probably Jonah. Well, Abba. So you have a sequence of names, and here on line 3, well, Abba. Again, we just don't have the identifiers of those names, Abba. The recto also has names, but it's not Abba, as you can see on line 1, were Rabban, line 2. We think that that's crossed out. I'm not sure. It looks were Rabban, or it's in a cartouche, which may indicate a singular status. I'm not sure. Were Rabban, something, Kof, Shin, and here were Rabban, down here were Rabban. So we have on the verso side names beginning with Abba. Unfortunately, most names are lost. On the recto side, names preceded by the epithet Rabban. Again, those names are lost. But they are, it's interesting because they do correlate to these long names that are in Codex B, which, as we have been pointed out, Alexei pointed out last week, is a very singular example of the Anathema of Paradise. Could we have the next slide? Then we have another small fragment from the Turfan Forschung in Berlin, N266. It's an upper corner fragment. Names preceded by the epithet Mar, and here you see on line 3 a very clear example. We think this is Ishoyav on line 2, and then Wamar, but we think that that's what it is. And then, sorry, and on the verso we have, no, that's Andronicus is verso line 1. And then we have the verso here of the manuscript. And here you have again line 1, a very nice example of Mar. Line and N320, which is an internal fragment, has 2 occurrences of Rabban. None of them fit together. We have tried many times, struggled to try to fit, to see how they would fit together, but they don't. But codicological features, line spacing, which is approximately 1 centimetre, and paleographic similarities between the fragments suggest that Syriac HT 354, N227, N266 and N320 may have all originated from the same prayer amulet, but their fragmentary condition, we just cannot endorse a reconstruction or a conclusion, but the suggestion is there. So, of course, the relationship of these fragments with each other and with Syriac HT 206 is not conclusive. But together with the exemplar from the Sogdian, it suggests that the Anathema of Paradise was extant in Syriac at Turfan. And the categories of names, Abba, Mar, Rabban, may hark back, could I have the next slide please, may hark back to a prototype that reproduced the registers in Palladius's Lausiac history, which dealt with the exploits of men and women in the Christian koimene in the 3rd and 4th centuries. Now, Enanishu, the East Syriac writer Enanishu, translated this work around 645 at the monastery of Bet Abe, the great monastery in northern Mesopotamia. He translated Palladius' history and other ascetic works at the very famous monastery, has a great scriptorium. He composed his anthologies of monastic histories from Egypt called the Fathers of Paradise. And it was a very popular work, disseminated widely. It was the subject of a commentary by Dadishu of Qatar, which he wrote his commentary. We have not found his commentary or fragments of his commentary at Turfan, but we have found other works of Dadishu of Qatar and other mystics, John of Daliatha. So the monastery certainly was aware of these great, what we might term mystical writers. They certainly had the repertoire. We just haven't found his Fathers of Paradise. It could have been there, we just haven't found it. My contention is, and this is where I'd like to suggest, that the Anathema of the Fathers of Paradise is derivative of this great work. It reproduces the categories in the names. It would be fabulous to have a full listing from Turfan, but of course we don't. And could I have the next slide, please? So, So many questions arise about the anathema. We don't know where it was composed. My suggestion is that the Vorlage originated in northern Mesopotamia, in the very fertile monastic environment, the great ascetic tradition that was certainly embraced and understood and promoted by the northern Mesopotamian monasteries. And I think that the Anathema of Paradise of the Fathers, or the Fathers of Paradise, was probably originally composed in northern Mesopotamia. And then, of course, an exemplar was brought to Turfan along with a lot of other literature, as I mentioned earlier. Whether internal adjustments were made to the prayer-amulet at Turfan in its long transmission, and we have no knowledge of this transmission, it's difficult to ascertain. The fragments are too fragmentary. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the terminology, the phraseology of prayer amulets is somewhat flexible, as it is the case with incantation bowls. But one might wonder whether the Anathema of the Fathers of Paradise might have included local saints. Unfortunately, We've got no insight. It would be fascinating to know. The same as Codex B, Marjon of Jilu, Marjon of Hatra, Marjon of Hira. Well, they're not actually local, but they're Mesopotamian, etc. So both, we don't have any insight into this, but the Sogdian manuscript does tell us that the anathema was known and must have been used by the monks, because the literature that they used in their everyday lives, if you can say monks have an everyday life, which anyway, their everyday life, all of the hagiographies and other reading material was in Sogdian. So the very fact that this anathema is in Sogdian is quite telling. However, the exploits of the great ascetics were enshrined in anthologies such as Enanishu's Paradise of the Fathers, and I suggest that many of the great names were transferred to a popular idiom of piety, the prayer-amulet, which acted as a private counterpart to the public expression in the liturgy, where we find often many references to protect from ails and different ills, etc. So the raison d'etre of the amulet is clearly articulated in both the Syriac and Sogdian fragments. Syriac HT 206. May you remove from him illnesses and diseases and fevers, blah, blah, blah. N396, which is the Sogdian fragment, by the prayers, and then naming all the various martyrs. May this anathema book and writing be sealed, the etc. So, comprehensive registers of names, of which Codex B, published by Golantz, which has nearly 100 names, it's by far the longest anathema in the repertoire of handbooks, served to protect the bearer of a prayer amulet from a comprehensive range of ills. So you use a comprehensive range of names. It was a trajectory, it was not a magical device, but it was a trajectory that connected the bearer, and the main aim being protection, as it is with incantation bowls, with the great Christian ascetic ecumene that transgressed theological and doctrinal boundaries. It goes back to the pre-schismatic history of the Syriac Church, to Ephraim and to Narsai and Antony, of course, even beyond the Syriac repertoire. So it functions, the prayer amulet functions as what I call living memory, drawing on Ricoeur's theories, transporting the past, the great ascetical heritage, into the present, and of course projecting that into the future for the overall aim of protecting the client. So they're deeply embedded in the repertoire of the Church of the East as a mnemonic device, connecting the person with the great fathers of the Church, who, even though Turfan was so far distant, and even today is so far distant from Egypt and what we might call the West Asia, it connected them, and it placed them within that great living heritage. And I'll say thank you very much.
Yeah, Erica, thank you so much for this fascinating lecture. It was a pleasure to hear that. And I think we have some minutes for questions. Who would like to start now?
May I say some words?
Of course.
Yeah. I enjoyed every slide of this presentation.
Well, thank you, Alexei, because of these technical difficulties.
Yes. No, I mean the content, not the shape of the slide, but I mean it's very, very interesting because this text is so popular in all this tradition, and all of us wants to know the history of this text, and this material from Turfan sheds new light on this. But I just wanted to add that probably some of these enigmatic texts could find their parallels in the bigger corpus. I mean, if we try to read every instantiation of this paradise charm, we maybe find some more parallels to this Turfan material. But so for, up to now, we have only maybe Goland's edition, yes, and maybe, I don't remember, in the manuscript from Kazan, which was published by Anna Cherkashina. Anna, can you tell me, do we have there Paradise of the Fathers?
Let me look it up.
Well, the thing is, there are a number of paradise. It is popular, but Syriac HT 206 matches Codex B, which is quite atypical of that. I mean, it is popular. I certainly agree with you, but Codex B is quite singular within that repertoire.
I wanted to tell you that we cannot say is it singular or not, because if we check all like 50 manuscripts which we have now, we can probably come to another conclusion, because nobody checked it actually. From my own experience, we are trying to check this as much as possible, all these copies of charms. For example, in the summer, we have this on our YouTube channel. I checked all the instances of evil eye charms. Then I made a presentation on childbirth charms, and nobody did it before. Maybe we can find some material from this new article of Selman Rohrer. As you know, he checked.
Yes, I
he
do
refers
know.
to you helped him somehow, yes. Because for some texts he give many textual variants from many manuscripts. So probably we can make together, or with someone else can make this work. I mean, reading all these examples of Charm of Paradise and all these manuscripts. But this is special works which should be done. I'm sure it will bring interesting results, as usually it happens, which we saw this childbirth with evil eye and so on and so on. So thank you again for great presentation.
Yes, well, I'm sure that there are many variants. I'm just tracing back, and it's nice to find. And I was interested to sort of course, can't know for sure, but I think that they're derivative. That this one is derivative of that very famous and work, The Paradise of the Fathers.
That was very important remark. I mean, these predecessors of this topic. Yeah, I never know. I never knew about this writings of Ananisho and Adisho and so on. I think John, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I'd like to tweak this just a little bit. Wonderful lecture, by the way. I really enjoyed it. I could actually understand some of the Aramaic, which was very gratifying to me, from Arabic and from Akkadian. But anyway, there is such a thing as what you might call Christian magic. And it's Christian not just in the sense that it uses, saints and that sort of thing to heal for healing purposes or other purposes, but that there's an extension from healing into the idea of salvation, of bringing salvation. So, I mean, it's sort of really, and I would put this in this type of thing in that category. In other words, it's healing in this world, but ultimately it's the ultimate healing, which is the attainment of paradise and a world in which there is no suffering and no pain and no evil eye and no evil of any kind is present, that you will one day hopefully join. So in other words, kind of a fully Christian form of magic. And then in connection with that, I have a suggestion for the figure that you have on that one. The first thing that you showed has a figure on it.
Oh, right.
The horseman with the spear. And,
that's Mar Tamsis, and the figure is now Mar Tamsis is not identified as combating it is of course the spirit of the daughter of the moon, which is lunacy, and we don't know when that correlation comes in, because that is not mentioned in the Turfan. That's a later development, and of course obviously Turfan, we think the manuscripts are written 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, and you've got then a leap to the mid-18th century. So we've got a period of transition, and we've got very little evidence. Maybe more people are coming up with intermediate, and this is why Turfan was so important. It actually established that the tradition was there 800 years before our first extant examples. So the identification of saints with particular ailments or ills or what demons, demonesses, is something that doesn't happen at Turfan, and that is why I don't term it as magic. This is part of the private piety, whereas later on what you are finding is and I've got someone ringing me, but never mind. What you find later on in the 17th, 18th centuries has shifted access, but I do believe that the fragments of Turfan they're used by the monks in the monastery. They're not magic.
Well, okay.
I think magic is a term that we use
I'm not talking about
and isn't really empathic with the environment of a monastic establishment.
Well, perhaps because I come from a tradition in which the magic is just private purposes as opposed to public purposes, and religion is the public purposes part of it, that it's all a continuum. And I think that's not different actually for a long time, even in the Western Europe, that there's not, at the popular level anyway, a distinction between those things. And I remind you,
I would have to debate with you quite robustly on that point, because I think that there is a major distinction.
Oh, sure.
We haven't got time in this. I think that there is a very major distinction, and the point is the users within at Turfan, of course. The monastery would have been a center for, if you might even say, your point about healing and salvation is very important. The monastery would have been a center for healing with the ultimate purpose, of course, of salvation. That the monks would not have thought of that as magic.
I think, okay, well, fine. But I agree with you on that. I'm just saying that okay, we can agree to drop the word magic, fine, but that we agree essentially on what the purpose, that we have a healing mixture of that. And Saint Raphael is interesting in that context. because he does both healing. He's a healing saint, but also he's the one who blows the trumpet for Last Judgment. And in the now this is the interesting part for this image, is that he is shown in Sudanese churches as actually leading the apocalyptic battle against evil, the final triumph over evil. He is shown on a horse and with a spear.
Yes, well, that's right. The rider saint is a very common motif.
Yes.
Very, very common. But we don't find that at Turfan. When the Syriac prayer amulets actually adopted, who knows, because the earliest examples, and maybe Gabby, who is here, can tell us more, but I understand they're mid-18th century, early 18th century. So you've got a gap of probably 6 centuries between, and there is a shift. There is a shift from Turfan to the fragments that are used in northern Mesopotamia, and I suggest that is because the Turfan communities died out. The usage of prayer amulets, which we know is quite widespread from Turfan, Karakoto. There's also a Syriac prayer amulet, quite widespread, but of course it died out with the decline of Christianity amongst the communities, whereas the tradition continued in northern Mesopotamia, but of course those communities went through remarkable changes in the 15th, 16th centuries, and of course this literature is a very receptive to changes. So someone, and I'm not an iconographer, but my colleague Eva Beliska-Witakovska has written on the iconography. That's not part of, we don't find any iconography at Turfan. So there are changes, and that's a living tradition.
Exactly, but the same motif of healing and salvation, connected in some interesting way, that allows sort of the popular concern with healing sick babies or whatever it is, and the ultimate sort of goal of salvation to be combined in a harmonious way, right? That doesn't leave healing out in the dark. And doesn't make it wrong to use healing, to do right little things that will help you with healing or whatever.
That's integral to the mentality. I mean, that is how your healing was achieved, your faith.
Exactly.
In the sense.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, the point is that there's not a disjunction between those two things at all. Okay, so anyway, that was just a point to okay, I've talked enough, so I will bow out.
Someone else wants to say anything?
Hi, Erica. Thank you so much for that talk. That was really interesting. I just wanted to ask, do you think the monks at Turfan, when they were writing these prayer amulets, do you imagine that they were working from books of amulet texts, like the modern Book of Protection, or were these amulet texts at that time circulating in a different way or in different manuscripts?
Well, that's a very pertinent question, because format is really important, and the codex type of fragments, which we've shown even in the Syriac HT 206, for example, that looks as if they are handbooks, because the personal prayer amulets, and Alexa, I showed that scroll where it had on the back, it was clearly folded. It was very exciting to see that it had been folded. It had a cross of Church of the East. Only 2 examples in the entire repertoire of 500 plus fragments where there is any decoration, and that's only with the cross of the Church of the East. So this Syriac HT 99 was one of them. And I have come to the conclusion, and I did write on this for a conference actually held at St. Petersburg some years ago, very nice city too, I might say, where I distinguish between handbooks that are consulted, used by the monks, and actual prayer amulets written for individuals which are in scroll form. Now, the bigger question, and I can't answer it here, is that we think that the scroll form was still the personal form of writing because, for example, in China, until the 9th century, everything was written on scrolls. The codex is introduced from the West. So it may be, and of course, scroll forms for amulets even in the 19th century were used amongst the Christian community. So there does seem to be a division based on format between personal items and items that are what we might call pedagogical items or instructive items that the monks used. And I think that they probably did have handbooks from which they wrote. They may have written from memory too, because memory is an important thing, an important ingredient. And these books, as you know, are very small. They're eminently suited to being transported. They're not like a hudra, which is very heavy, and you wouldn't cart a hudra from well, you might cart a very special hudra from Mesopotamia, but you know the handbooks, their format is conducive for them to be transported, but we just don't know where. I'm working on the paleography and the codicology. I think some of these are produced at Turfan or in the area. Could be Marv, could be other places. We just don't know.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, that's a great point about them being kind of made to be transported. Their kind of size and shape. They're very much pocket-sized, aren't they, the codexes?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Just one small question, just to clarify, Erica. Do you conclude that all these fragments are from codices, not from scrolls?
No, definitely not. Because if you go back to the second slide,
I don't know which is this.
No,
is
third slide.
One.
Sorry, third slide,
Yeah.
and the fourth slide.
Uh-huh.
So you see that you can see the folds and you can see the cross.
Yes.
And that is a scroll amulet. It was clearly cut down. It's clearly cut down from a larger text. And that is why if you go back to the previous slide, and that Syriac HT 330, and we did we identified all the manuscripts in consecutive order. So we looked at 99 and had no idea until we got to 330. And I remember Mark saying to me, "Oh, Erica, I found a quotation from John 1, chapter 1, which is the beginning of Syriac HT 330. Very few quotations from the New Testament at Turfan. So I got very excited. And the moment I looked at it, I realized it was for Mar Tamsis. And you can't see the details, not clear enough on that slide. But it was clear that this and this once joined. But as you can see, someone has cut the side of Syriac HT 99. And so it actually doesn't make sense, because the words, there are parts of words, and that's why you've got all these dots, you know, and so parts of it are there. So it clearly, and of course, that's not an important part.
But I'm sorry, when I look at the right, at the right example on this slide, it doesn't look to me from the same.
Oh, it is. It is codicologically, and it is on paleography, Alexei, with a very distinctive hand. It may not show.
Yes. No, I mean, it doesn't look to me from the small scroll. It may be. It could.
No.
It's from the book.
It's a larger fragment that has been cut down and made into a prayer amulet.
And this one also looks like
this is from the codex.
Yes,
this is from the codex. And go on to the next slide. That is from another scroll. That's it's got Sogdian down the bottom. It's unrelated text. It's these
Yes,
texts are
yes,
often
yes.
reused. And so N365 is, we've lost the intermediate part, but that apparently is from a scroll.
Mhm. Thank you, thank you. Now it's clear.
So format is really important for dictating function,
Yeah.
I think. I mean, we have to find more, but from all what I understand, Hidemi Takahashi is working on a Syriac prayer amulet, the Otani amulet, and that is a scroll format too. And Natalia Shmelova published the Karakoto prayer amulet, and I think that is also a scroll. So, and I think that there are two different formats, and the book, the codex, is for what we might call handbooks that the monks would have used, and that the scroll is actually the personal item that could be rolled up, women wearing it in a piece of jewelry or tucked into a piece of clothing easily.
Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, yes, maybe we finish our section. I just wanted to draw your attention to one moment. I stop sharing screen. Yes. I just wanted to draw your attention to the publication of the manuscript from Kazan by Anna Cherkashina, which is in Russian, but it has the complete Syriac text of the big Book of Protection, one of the best books from the 18th century. You may find it in academia. It should have, and in this manuscript you can find many new texts. You can just read the Syriac text.
So can you give us a link, please?
Yes, I will try. Yeah. Maybe Anna will help.
Just a moment.
One moment.
Just while we're waiting, the Chinese have excavated a site north of the Tian Shan, which was the summer residence of the kings of Turfan, and they have found, I've only read a short article in Chinese, or actually it was translated for me because I do not read Chinese, a very large church of the east at this summer residence of the Turfan kings. And so that's very exciting. It's not clear whether they have found texts or not, but it's very difficult to elicit such information from the Chinese. They certainly, Rong Xinjiang from Beijing did say that it was a very major church, which they had discovered, a church of the East. So we are having more material coming out from the area.
Great,
and
great.
More text.
Yeah.
All right. Good.
So the in chat you have the link to this publication, and here it is on the page of Anna Cherkashina. And welcome everyone, read this text because it has a very good Syriac text from it is dated 1735 or so.
Right.
It's one of the earliest texts which we have, and it is big and beautiful. Yes.
So, right, I might ask you to send that link.
I will send you the link in the letter.
Yes, but I mean that's great, and we are pushing the boundaries back. Now we have at the sort of early 18th century, but we've still got 6 centuries between
we have quite many manuscripts from 18th century now. So we are sure that this tradition is earlier than 18th
Oh, sure.
century. Yes.
Sure.
We
But it
have one-
undergoes changes, and
Yes,
those
yes.
changes are interesting.
We have one illustration of Rabban Hormizd from, I think, 16th century, which looks exactly like these illustrations from later manuscripts, but it is just one illustration inside the earlier manuscript. So it is, we are getting more and more material that this tradition was, perennial. So thank you very much, everybody. Hope to see you again in a week at the presentation by Dr. David Calabro. Yes. So bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I
Bye.
have to stop the recording.
До свидания.
До свидания.